Good evening, and a very warm welcome to St. Paul's Cathedral. My name is Paula Gooder, and I hope you're expecting to see me this evening because I'm the one who is speaking alongside our cathedral consort. For those of you who have been to other of our Institute events, this is going to take a slightly different style to those ones. Normally, what we do is we have a talk, and then we have question and answer at the end of the session. But tonight, we want to make it a little more meditative, a little more reflective. So my conversation partners this evening are the St. Paul's Cathedral Consort. So I will speak, they will then sing a piece of music, and we will go backwards and forwards that way. And I hope that you will enjoy being in this space. Do take the time just to take it in. There will be space to think, to reflect, and I hope that you enjoy this early Advent evening. And now we're ready to begin. So please join me in welcoming my exceedingly talented colleagues, the St. Paul's Cathedral Consort. Advent. One of the wonderful things about the Christian year is that it takes a shape. It begins, as you know, in Advent, continues onwards into Christmas. Depending on the way in which the calendar falls, you might get a bit of ordinary time, then there is Lent, then there is Easter, then there's a large bit of ordinary time. And then we come round again to Advent. And I've been thinking about the Christmas season, or the church seasons, for a very long time now. And the thing that I have learnt in my thinking is that each time of the year has a special gift to teach us. Something that we need to learn that helps us to live our lives to the best of our capacity. And it's probably invidious to say that there is a favourite season in the year, but I have one, and it's Advent. There is something about Advent which for me is so deeply rich and so deeply thought-provoking. And I hope that this evening I will be able to persuade you why Advent is the best of the Christian seasons, until I then talk about Christmas and then tell you that that's really the best one. In a way, I think that Advent kind of gets the wrong end of the deal of the marketing campaign for particular seasons. So you have, with Christmas, you have the birth of Jesus. With Easter, you've got the resurrection of Jesus. What's not to like? Advent is about waiting. And one of the troubles that we have when we're thinking about Advent is that waiting does not sound very exciting, does it? If I said to you, may I invite you to a great season of waiting, I wonder how many of you would go, oh, yes, please, that would be fun. But I've learned over the years that actually what you learn in Advent about waiting is actually something really essential. So let's just spend a while thinking about waiting and why waiting is so important. In a way, absolutely everybody knows that Advent is about waiting, because in the past few years, Advent calendars have suddenly taken off again. I am of the age where I look back on the Advent calendar that I used to have when I was a little girl. It was massively exciting, and every year I would wait with anticipation to get my Advent calendar, which was a sheet of cardboard with another sheet of cardboard on the front of it, and you would open your little window to find a picture of a sheep or an angel or a shepherd, and I still remember the overwhelming excitement of opening my Advent calendar every year. Now, you cannot move for your choice of Advent calendars. You might have a cheese Advent calendar, or a coffee one, or a perfume Advent calendar. Of course, the best is chocolate. There is no doubt about that. But these days, your countdown calendar, as they are often called, have lots of exciting things around behind them. But I wonder whether they remain quite as exciting as they did when you just had your 2 sheets of cardboard and the pictures that came behind them. Because what they reminded us of was that we were waiting, and we were waiting for something really very significant. As I said just a moment ago, the problem with the word waiting is that it is rather a negative concept in our world. Being on the waiting list for something is not something you particularly relish. When you phone up the doctors, as I did yesterday, and discover that you are number 5 in the queue and have to wait to become number 1 in the queue, I would like to tell you that after all these years of practicing waiting, I went, "Ooh, goody, I'll be able to wait while I get to number 1. I would like to tell you that. Of course, you know I didn't. And waiting is something that can feel really difficult, something that can cause us to struggle quite a lot. And over the years, I've wondered actually whether we should coin a new word, a word that captures waiting a little bit better. Of course, one possibility is to use the word anticipation rather than waiting. Anticipation sounds altogether better, don't you think? I'm anticipating something. The problem with the word anticipating is twofold. The first is that you're still wishing the time away. Anticipation is still trying to move things on to get to the stage that you want to get to. And the second thing is, waiting is not always for something that we want. Sometimes we find ourselves waiting for something that we really don't want. This year, my mother died. She died back in July. And it became very clear to me from about April time that this was the year in which she would reach the end of her life. And I was aware, as I waited from April until July, that I was waiting for something that I absolutely did not want to happen. And yet, the waiting was a really important experience. So waiting can be for good things. It can be for things that we don't want to happen. And the thing that I think is really important is learning the skill of waiting. I was trying to work out a while back how long ago it was since I wrote my first Advent book. I mentioned it earlier. It's called The Meaning is in the Waiting. And I then realized that this year I wrote that book 18 years ago, which blows my mind. I can't quite believe that it was 18 years ago. And actually, I started thinking about this book 22 years ago. And the reason I know that is that the reason I started thinking about waiting, and why waiting was really important for us, was I started thinking about it while I was pregnant with my younger daughter. And there is nothing like being pregnant during Advent to get you into a feast of thinking about waiting and why waiting is really important. And I can't quite believe now that I'm standing here talking to you about Advent when my daughter is 21. So I've been doing this thinking about waiting for a very, very long time now. And there is something about pregnant waiting which is very important to bear in mind. Because, of course, given half a chance, most of us would choose not to wait. If I said to you, there are two options. There's option A, and you can have it right now, and there's option B, and you have to wait 9 months for it. Most of us would go A every day. But actually, those of us who have born children would tell you B is the better option. Because as you wait, you grow, you nourish, you bring something to life. And there is something that I learnt while I was waiting for the birth of my second daughter about waiting, which was profoundly significant in my life and remains so. But now I look back on the past 21 years since she was born, and I realize that I've been waiting in a different way for the previous 21 years. Of course, I have not, even for a nanosecond, well, maybe for a nanosecond, waiting for her to leave home. On the really messy days, perhaps I did. But I wasn't, of course. What I was waiting was, and I didn't know at the time, I was waiting for her to become. I was waiting for her to develop who she is. Now my two daughters are 26 and 21. And one of the things that never ceases to amaze me is that the people that they have become is astonishing. But while I was sitting in the park and they were playing on the swings, while I was going with them to their friend's house and they were playing, while we were knee-deep in papier-mâché or whatever it was that we were doing together, I wouldn't have been able to tell you that I was waiting. But I now discover that I was waiting. There was a while back when my daughters were about to leave home, where there was a song that would reduce me to tears within the first 3 notes of it playing. And I think I won't be alone in identifying that as ABBA's slipping through my fingers all the time. Those of us who have children of a certain age, it sends you over the edge within a few beats. But what I've learned, looking back and thinking about that, is that time was not slipping through my fingers. Actually, what I was doing was waiting with my daughters while they became. They haven't finished becoming yet, but they've done a really great job so far. And that waiting into becoming is a really important thing. And one of the troubles that we have in the way in which our society functions is that we're forever attempting either to hurry along, let's make it happen really quickly, or we look back to the good old days. Wasn't it so much better 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago? How much further back do you want to go? And you look back and you think, wasn't it a much better experience then? But actually, I've learnt over the years that actually the best moment is now. Whatever the now is the best moment. And what we need to do, what Advent helps us to do, is that it helps us to learn living now. There is a saying that people often like to use, which is, life is what happens when you're making other plans. I wonder, actually, whether what Advent does is remind us that life is what happens while you are waiting. While you're waiting for whatever it is that you are waiting for, that's when you are living, and you are living fully. So what I've learned about Advent is that as you learn to wait, then you learn to live, and you learn to live deeply and fully and richly. Because the problem, of course, is if you're always looking forward to the next thing and the next thing and the next thing, then actually you forget to enjoy this thing. What Advent does for us each year is remind us that we might be getting ourselves ready for Christmas. 25th of December, when all of our plans will miraculously come together and everything will be ordered and it will be straightforward, dinner will cook on time, we'll arrive at church at the right moment, the sermon we may need to preach will be preached brilliantly, all of those things we look forward to may come to a culmination. But even if Christmas goes brilliantly, even if you achieve everything you want to on Christmas Day, that's one day. Advent is 24 days. And if you could live the deepest, richest, fullest life that you've got for the 24 days, then the one day of Christmas will take on a different sheen, a different sense. There is something, I think, about learning to savor. As I've said before, waiting is maybe not the right word. What if we use the word savoring instead? We're learning to savor the days as they go past. And as we savor the days as they go past, we learn something. The thing that I've learned over 21 years of thinking about Advent and waiting is that waiting, savoring, anticipating, whatever word you want to use for it, is actually a muscle. I'm at that stage of life where I can tell you when you don't use your muscles, they start to sag and look a bit miserable. Our waiting muscles are underused in the society in which we live. And you can use your muscles, your waiting muscle, really well. And I've learned that in using the waiting muscle, it gets stronger and better. When I used to live in Birmingham, which was until the year 2020, I now look back on myself with amusement because now I will arrive on the tube platform and on a really bad day it will say the next tube is in 7 minutes. And I go, 7 minutes? Are you mad? I cannot possibly wait 7 minutes for the next bit of public transport. In Birmingham, if I had arrived at the bus stop and was informed that the bus was coming in 7 minutes, firstly, I wouldn't have believed them. But secondly, I'd have gone, well, that's a win. And what I've learned over the years is that actually waiting for an amount of time is simply a number. And we can learn to do it. We can engage with it. So waiting is really important. And what I'd like to commend to you this Advent, as you're preparing yourself to commemorate Advent this year, that you learn micro-waiting. Sometimes we have to do big waiting, where we have to wait for something big, as I did for the death of my mother, or you might be waiting for results that come back from the hospital. Or you might be waiting for something way more exciting, like a wedding or a birthday or something like that. Those are the big moments of waiting. But actually, every single day, we get to practice micro-waiting. While you've turned the kettle on and you're waiting for it to boil, while you are putting your coat on, ready to go outside and needing to tie your shoelaces properly. There are many, many moments in every day where we have to wait. And if we learn to wait well, then I can tell you from experience that macro waiting becomes a lot easier when you get good at micro waiting. When the girls were little, one of our family's favourite films was Mr. Megorium's Wonder Emporium. I don't know if anybody else watched it. Utterly love it. It's a fantasy about a toy shop and run by Mr. Megorium. And there comes a moment in the film where Mr. Megorium decides it's time for him to depart. There was a time in his life when he found the perfect pair of shoes, and he bought 18 pairs of them to see him through his life. He was wearing his 18th pair, and they had begun to wear thin, and he decided it was time to go. And his companion tried to persuade him not to go. So she did all the most fun things for him that she could imagine in order to get him not to go. So she went to a bed shop and got him to bounce on all the mattresses. She got him large sheets of bubble wrap and he tap danced on them. And then they went to a clock shop and they set all the clocks in the shop to 11:59 and 40 seconds, I think it was. And when she'd done that, she said, "And now we wait." To which Mr. Megorium responded, "No. We breathe, we pulse, we regenerate. Our hearts beat, our minds create, our souls enchant. 37 seconds well spent is a lifetime." And I think that encapsulates Advent. You aren't expected to do anything grand or magnificent in Advent. What I commend to you this Advent is the action of micro-waiting, learning to spend your 37 seconds really, really well. Those 37 seconds in which your mind can create and your soul can enchant. And I can tell you that if you learn how to do that, then when you come into the big waiting moments of life, you'll discover your waiting muscle is altogether much stronger. And once it is altogether much stronger, then the waiting becomes more deep and more meaningful. The choir is about to sing to you again. This time they're going to sing "Drop Down, Ye Heavens" from Judith Weir. And then I will return and reflect a little bit more, this time on waiting for something that has already happened. So I started thinking about waiting and reflecting on the fact that one of the reasons why Advent struggles as a season is because waiting isn't something we like to do very much. It's not the only problem with Advent. The other problem with Advent is that it is a season in which we are to wait, but we're waiting for something that's already happened. Imagine if one day you waited all the way through Advent and we then said, actually, no, Christmas is off. Jesus wasn't really born. We know he was. So therefore, what we're asked to do is to wait for something that we know did happen and has happened. And that gets you in to one of the really knotty and complicated bits of biblical theology that I want to talk to you about now. One of the things that's often very difficult when you're reading the Bible is to try and work out what event they're talking about when they're in any particular moment. You find it is particularly in Psalm 74, but you find it in other places as well. Psalm 74 is one of those psalms which talks about God breaking open the head of the Leviathan. And then it talks about him splitting the waters. And then it talks about new life and new hope. And if you're the kind of person who wants to work out what's going on in a Bible story, you might be tempted to say, well, is the writer talking about creation? It seems to be, because when you find Leviathan mentioned elsewhere in the Bible, it's often God talking about creation. Or is the author talking about the Exodus and crossing the Red Sea? Maybe the author might be talking about crossing the Jordan and entering the Promised Land. Or maybe they're talking about crossing the Jordan again when they come back from the exile. Which one is it, we might be tempted to ask? The answer is all of them. And what I want to talk to you now about is one of the wonderful things I think that we do in Advent, because we are remembering something that happened in the past. But we're doing it for a very, very particular reason. And it's the particular reason which is the key thing for understanding Advent. One of the things that I often use as an analogy to help people understand history in the Bible is I try to imagine. So imagine you've got a snowball and you're standing on the top of a hill. And what you're going to do is you're going to push your snowball down the hill. And as your snowball goes down the hill, it goes round and round, obviously. And as it goes round, it picks up a layer of snow. And then it picks up another layer of snow. And then it picks up another layer of snow. This is, of course, on a perfect hill, which, and it would never work. But just imagine my fantasy hill on which you can make your snowball and push it down the hill, and it arrives at the bottom of the hill, still the same snowball, but much bigger than it was at the top of the hill. That is biblical history. Let me explain to you why. So one of the problems that we have when we're reading the Bible is our view of history is very linear. You start at one end with creation, and you walk along the line to the other end. I haven't gone very far, but to the end of all times. I could actually do a really good illustration of the line, but then it would take me a long time. But the idea is often when we're thinking about history, we're going in a straight line. Within the Bible, within a Hebrew understanding of history, actually, it's much more like a spiral or like a snowball rolling down the hill. By which I mean, there are events that the biblical writers think are the same event that happen again in a slightly different way, and then again in a slightly different way, and then again, and then again, and then again. So when in Psalm 74, he's talking about this event, and we're going, yes, but which precise event are you talking about? He's going, I am telling you about the history of God's salvation in the world. And God's salvation looks like creation, and like Exodus, and like settling in the Promised Land, and like returning from exile. And then the New Testament writers pick it up and go, thank you very much, we like this image. So it is also like the birth of Jesus. It is like Jesus' teaching and ministry. It is like Jesus' resurrection. It's like Pentecost, and on you go. So the reason why it's often hard to read a biblical story and work out exactly what they're talking about is because you've got these layers upon layers upon layers. Within the biblical writer's mind, they are the same event, just happening in a slightly different way each time. So when we are waiting for the birth of Jesus at Christmas, we are waiting for that thing that happened 2,000 years ago. We're also waiting for visions of God's intervention in the world now. What looks like God intervening in the world now that is similar to the birth of Jesus and to the return from exile and to the Exodus and to the creation. And one of the things that, for me as a biblical scholar, I think I always feel very sad about is when people say, I really hate reading the Old Testament, it's really boring. And I have to say, if you are bang slap in the middle of Leviticus, I have some sympathy for you. It isn't the most exciting read ever. But the reason why we read the Bible and the reason why we remind ourselves of the Old Testament and the New Testament is we are looking for signs of who God was. And when God intervenes in the world, when God acts to make a difference in the world, then we recognize it. We can say, I see it there, and I see it there, and I see it there. And we do it not because it's interesting that God intervened in the world 2,000, 3,000, 4,000, however many thousand years ago. We do it because we believe God intervenes in the world now. And if we become experts at recognizing how God intervenes in the world, then we will recognize it when God intervenes now. There's a favorite poem of mine that I think really illustrates this, and it's Elizabeth Barrett Browning, who says, "Earth is crammed with heaven, and every common bush afire with God. But only he who sees takes off his shoes. The rest sit around it and pluck blackberries." And it's a clever illustration for what happens so often in the world in which we live, is we sit there grumpily declaring that God has not been at work because we are munching on the blackberries, and actually have forgotten to look for God's intervention in the world. I'm going to be a little bit naughty now and stray out of Advent to give you an illustration, because I think the best illustration of this in the entire Bible is the story of Anna and Simeon. It's only a little bit after Advent, so you'll let me off, won't you? And what's really amazing about the story of Anna and Simeon in the temple, and particularly Anna, it won't surprise you that I think, is that Mary and Joseph arrive in the temple with this tiny, tiny baby. The baby has done very little thus far. The baby has cried, the baby has eaten. I dare say the baby did other things, but Luke decided not to tell us those. And actually hasn't done very much other than exist. And into the temple came Mary and Joseph with the tiny baby. And what you have to try and get into your head when you're thinking about the temple is that it's very easy to slip, isn't it? Especially here. Here we are in St. Paul's Cathedral. It's easy to imagine that the temple looked quite like St. Paul's Cathedral. As far as you can, chuck that out of your head. That is not an image that is going to help you. The floor plan of the cathedral at the time of Jesus is around the equivalent of 47 football pitches. It's absolutely huge. And we are told by Josephus that for a major festival period, there would be 20,000 priests on duty at any one time. That's just the priests. And the job of the priests was to oversee the sacrifices on the altar. So take out of your head a lovely, beautiful, evocative, peaceful scene. Put into your head instead a massive building with 20,000 priests, like I say, in the festival period, sacrificing. There is blood, there are smells, there are animals all over the place. It's noisy, it's busy. And into that temple came a young woman and a man, whose age we don't know, with a tiny baby. And two people immediately went, "There he is." And I never stop the tingles down my spine at the thought of those two people going, "There he is." And you know the words of Simeon, which we hear on a regular basis. "My eyes have seen salvation." And we kind of mishear it often because we assume that what Simeon is saying is, "My eyes have seen the Saviour," as in that's what he's going to do in the future. But he doesn't say that. He says, "My eyes have seen salvation." In this tiny baby, Simeon saw the entire salvation of the world. And he and Anna were able to recognize it for what it was because, well, Anna, we are told by Luke, has been in the temple fasting and praying for a very long time. Unfortunately, the Greek isn't clear. It could either mean that it says she was a widow of 84 years. So it could either mean she was a widow who was 84, or it could mean that she had been a widow for 84 years. So she was either quite old or eye-wateringly old. Because if she'd been married, she was married for 7 years and then a widow of 84 years, probably got married at the age of 14. I'll leave you to do the maths. She was either, as I say, 84 or incredibly old. And she had spent her time in the temple, fasting and praying. She was waiting. She had spent an Advent existence of an exceedingly long time in the temple. And as a result, when salvation appeared, she could say, there it is. And I think that what Advent teaches us to do is to be the people who can go, there is God's salvation. I recognize it. I know what it looks like. There it is. And for me, one of the really important things about learning to wait for the thing that has already happened, and it happened 2,000 years ago, and we've celebrated it year in, year out for 2,000 years, is that we become people who can say, we know what salvation looks like. And that is the essence, I think, of Advent waiting. Which is time, I think, now for another pause. So now it's time to listen while the choir sing their next song, O Radiant Dawn by Macmillan. To finish our trilogy of impossible things, we've been thinking about waiting in the first section. Then we've been thinking about waiting for something that's already happened. So we need to end it with the third impossible thing for Advent, which is remembering the future, remembering the thing that hasn't happened yet. One of the things I often think about when I'm thinking about Advent is that Advent plays with time in a way that no other church season does. I'm often reminded in the middle of Advent of that most theological of television programs, Doctor Who. And in Doctor Who, the Doctor occasionally describes time as a ball of wibbly-wobbly, timey-wimey stuff. And in the middle of Advent, I am reminded of time being wibbly-wobbly, timey-wimey stuff. And the reason why is because in the middle of Advent, time collapses in on itself. We wait for something that hasn't happened, and we call to mind, we remember that which has not yet happened. And if that doesn't blow your mind, nothing will. And in a way, what we are called into in Advent is that deep and profound sitting in the utter mystery of the time which is the eternity of God, which wraps that which has happened around us, looking forward to that which has not happened. The future is in the Bible all the way through, that moment when the world will at last be the world as God wanted it to be. When God called it into being at the dawn of time, God imagined the world and everything that it could be. And basically, the tradition about the end times is a vision of the world as God wanted it to be, as God yearns for it to be. And in Advent, what we are invited to do is to join God in the grand imagination of what the world could be, of what the world might be if it could only come to its full fruition. Traditionally, the themes of Advent sound much less exciting than that, but it's really what they're talking about. There was a while when whenever you were asked to go and talk about Advent, you would be given the choice of 4 subjects: death, judgment, heaven, and hell. It always felt like, can I have heaven? No, someone's got that one already. You've got death, judgment, or hell. Which one would you like? And one of the reasons for that is that Advent trains our attention on those themes of the end of all times. And historically, they've been described under the headings of death, judgment, heaven, and hell. But what it really means is that there will come a moment in the future when God will gloriously intervene in the world. And if you want to get that sense of the biblical vision of what the world could be as God wanted it to be, go to a Messiah during the Christmas season. You will find Messiahs sung all over. They are one of the most popular things other than a Christmas carol concert. And what Handel does utterly brilliantly in the Messiah is he stitches together all the prophetic promises about what the future might be. And what you have in his words is this vision of the world as it could be. And what's very clever about how Handel did it is that what he is doing is reminding us that living life here, now, of course we are trained in the art of recognizing who God is. We are Anna and Simeon, recognizing salvation before us. But we're also people who are called to live out the world as God intended it to be, to live in the world as God hoped it would be. And the reason why Advent becomes the wibbly-wobbly, timey-wimey stuff is we're waiting for the birth of Jesus, who died and rose again. And they all come together in a perfect moment in Advent. And Jesus' resurrection is that moment that in which the future broke into the world. And it was now perfectly possible to live in the world as God wanted it to be. So it is possible to live in the midst of harmony and hope and joy and love and all of those things that Isaiah promises in his prophecies. And our job is not just to wait for it. Sometimes when we talk about the future, it can sound as though Christians' vocation is simply to hang around waiting for something better to happen at some point in the future and die disappointed because it didn't. It can kind of, when spoken about in the wrong way, can feel a little bit like that. Actually, the vocation of the Christian is to live knowing that the end of times has already broken into the world. And therefore, it is possible to live a life of harmony and peace and justice and hope and love. It isn't always possible, and this is where I have to stray into Paul. I strayed into Luke earlier. Let me stray now into Paul. One of the things about Paul's vision of new creation, and the reason why it was such a compelling theological idea, is that Paul believed that when Jesus rose from the dead, he brought into existence the new creation. The new creation is that in which the world can be as God wanted it to be. But Paul recognizes that new creation sits alongside old creation. And we live in a world in which new and old creation sit alongside. So where it might be possible to have harmony, it's also possible to have conflict. While it might be possible to have hope, it's also possible to have despair. It might be possible to have joy, also sorrow. You go on and on. We live in a world in which both of those things are true. Old creation and new creation sit alongside each other. But our vocation as Christians is whenever we can, as often as we can, to live the new creation. Where there is a choice, and you could choose conflict, choose harmony. Where there's a choice and you could choose sorrow, choose joy. It isn't always possible, but Paul's vision is that we are the people who can live that life. So our job isn't just to wait for God to do something miraculous. Our job is to live with every fiber of our being, knowing that Jesus has risen from the dead and that therefore the world is a different place, even though it might not look like it on the surface. So Advent reminds us that as we wait for something that we must train ourselves to recognize, which is God's action in the world. And as we wait, we live with every fiber of our being, knowing that the world can be a better place, and the world can be a better place in the way in which we live. The other thing that Advent does for us is remind us of the great characters of the past. And I want to end this evening by thinking a little bit about Mary. So the historic themes of Advent are death, judgment, heaven and hell, all a bit miserable. So unsurprisingly enough, when people brought in the Advent wreath, they put different themes on them. One of the best fights that happens in churches across the land every Advent is which candle is which on your Advent wreath, depending on your upbringing. And the biggest fight across the land is which character gets the pink candle. Hint, it isn't Mary. Because the 4 candles on the Advent wreath are traditionally associated with the matriarchs and the patriarchs, first Sunday, the prophets, second Sunday, John the Baptist, third Sunday, and Mary, fourth Sunday. The third Sunday is the pink candle. And the reason why it's a pink candle is because the third Sunday of Advent is Gaudete Sunday. And Gaudete Sunday Advent is recognized to be a season of great feast and penitence. And on Gaudete Sunday, the penitence lightens. So it is, you will have purple candles, and your pink candle reminds you that on the third Sunday of Advent, you get to be a bit cheerful. So it's John the Baptist who gets the pink candle for the arguments that you are about to have. But I want to end by thinking about Mary, because I think Mary brings in her very being all of the themes of Advent together. I started about thinking about waiting and the waiting of pregnancy. Of course, one of the things that we're doing in Advent is waiting with Mary. And one of the things I find very, very powerful during the season of Advent is to imagine this young woman. We don't know how old she was, but there's a very, very high chance she was a teenager, probably around 14. This young woman whose life had been turned utterly upside down by the promise of God. And she isn't sure what it's going to bring to her. She doesn't know what it's going to mean in her life. All that rings through history is Gabriel's promise to her. Nothing is impossible with God. And so during Advent, I often feel as though I wait with Mary as she's waiting to discover the way in which nothing is impossible with God. But the other thing I think that is striking about Mary is that every year at a Christmas carol service, we will have the reading from Isaiah 7. The Virgin will conceive and give birth to a son, and you will call his name Emmanuel. We all know it really, really well. But the thing that's really striking about Isaiah 7 is we normally don't pay enough attention to the rest of the passage, because the rest of the passage reveals something really interesting. So let me now read to you the rest of the passage and give you an insight into what was going on. So this is a conversation between Isaiah and the king. And the king was really worried about what was going to happen to his land. It was King Ahaz, and there was a moment when it looked as though the northern kingdom and the Syrians who were above the northern kingdom were going to come and invade Jerusalem. Ahaz was terrified about it, and Isaiah went out to talk to him. And he said, "Ask God for a sign." And Ahaz went, no, I couldn't possibly. And so Isaiah said, "I'll give you one anyway." And then the passage goes, "The Lord will give you a sign. the virgin or young woman, will conceive and give birth to a son and will call him Emmanuel. He will be eating curds and honey, which is the weaning food of the period. So he will probably have been being weaned. And then there's big questions about when a baby was weaned in this period. Let's call it around 9 months. So just kind of a little bit, just under a year. When he knows enough to reject the wrong and choose the right. For before the boy knows enough to reject the wrong and choose the right, the land of the two kings you dread will be laid waste. So it's a prophecy very directly to Ahaz, and it's a very straightforward prophecy. You are terrified, your land is about to be taken over by these two kings. There's a young woman, she's going to have a baby. By the time he grows up and is weaned, then they won't be able to threaten you anymore. That's what the prophecy is about. Except for it isn't. And that's the really exciting thing about it, is that was the historic prophecy. But of course, it is beautifully and perfectly true also of Mary. So in the person of Mary, Mary was waiting for something that had already happened that was also perfectly true of her. And so therefore she encapsulates that theme of waiting for the past. And then the other thing that is beautiful, I think, about Mary is that she remembered the future throughout her life, in that she lived into a life that she didn't know what it was. My most favorite bit about the stories of Mary actually come from the book of Acts. So Mary has accompanied Jesus to the cross. She's been there when he rose again. And she would have every excuse at that point to say, job's a good one. I've done what I need to do. But actually, she stayed. And we just get a little hint of her right as they are waiting for the moment of Pentecost. And the disciples were in the room waiting for God to come, praying for the Holy Spirit. And in the middle of them was Mary. So Mary had lived into her future. She had in herself incorporated the past, and she had lived into her future. And so our final piece of music that we're going to hear tonight is one of my absolute favorite pieces of music. It's Britain's Hymn to the Virgin. And before the choir sing it, I would just like to tell you why this is a really, really important piece of music for me. It's important to me because I think Mary draws the themes of Advent together into her being very spectacularly. But it's also important to me because the reason I'm a Christian, the reason I am here at all today, is the anthem you're about to hear. So when I was an undergraduate, I had grown up as a Christian, and as often happens when you are a student, everything that you thought you knew about yourself and God and the world and just kind of falls apart. You are halfway immensely confident, and the other halfway have lost everything entirely. And I went to Oxford as an undergraduate from Manchester. I went to a big comprehensive school in Manchester. And if I'm honest, the only reason I went to Oxford was because my teacher told me I couldn't. So she said, there's no way someone like you will ever get into Oxford. So I went, will I not? And that was the sole reason why I applied. And then I got in. And often the problem of these things is when if you do a thing for just to be able to show somebody, you've then got to do it. And I hadn't processed that. So in my first term in Oxford, I was completely bemused. I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know which way was up. And it felt as though I was completely on my own, lost my Christian faith, didn't know what was going on at all. And one evening, I was walking around restlessly, went to my favourite place, which is the cloisters in New College. And Evensong was about to start, so I went into Evensong. And the anthem they were singing that evening was Britain's Hymn to the Virgin. And in that moment, I knew myself to be deeply and profoundly held by God. I was loved. I was taken into the eternal view of God, of the entire world. And I knew who I was. I suddenly came to myself and I knew exactly who I was and what I needed. And it was very foolish of me to choose for the choir to sing this tonight, because I find it really hard to hear it and not cry. So please don't make me cry tonight. But I think it is a anthem that encapsulates beautifully everything that we've been reflecting on tonight. The choir will sing that in a moment, and then I've written a reflection which I would like to read to you after the anthem. It's what I've been thinking about for 21 years as I've been thinking about Advent. So after the most beautiful anthem ever, I will read to you my reflection on Advent. Advent teaches us the skills of God-like living, which inhabits the enormous expanse of eternity by being fully and vitally alive right now. We tell stories of God's ancient salvific actions, not so that we immerse ourselves in the past through the lens of nostalgic rose-tinted spectacles, but so that we learn the language of salvation, so that when salvation breaks in on us, we recognize it, can name it and sing in joy at its arrival. We dream dreams of the world as it could be, not so that we can skip over the grief and trials of our present existence, nor so that we might leave behind our everyday existence, but so that we learn to recognize the glimmers of God's future in our world now, and not only to recognize them, but to live them boldly, wholeheartedly, and gloriously. In short, Advent teaches us the basic skills of living, skills which in life we so easily lose, forget, or ignore. Most of all, Advent teaches us that waiting is not an inconvenient lull between more pleasant and engaging activity, but the very beating heart of life itself. And so we wait with bated breath, with eyes wide open, with hearts on fire, with minds alert. We wait, teetering precariously on the brink between what has been and what will be. We nurture silently and unseen the new life of God, with eyes fixed on the horizons of our existence. We welcome the God who, in the midst of our frantic searching, comes to us. With souls honed in the ancient stories of salvation, we learn to recognize God's presence in unforeseen and unexpected places. We wait. And as we wait, immersed in that most active inactivity, we are transformed, enchanted, refreshed, renewed.